Velthari looked at the datapad with tired eyes. Another war assignment. Another chance to watch young species tear each other apart while the galaxy watched and judged. The Alterian had been doing this job for 30 years, flying from one conflict to another, recording the same patterns of violence and stupidity that seemed to plague every corner of space. "The humans are fighting the Morvek Empire," said Editor Gencol, his forearms moving in dismissive gestures. "Council wants a standard report. You know the drill. Document their primitive tactics, file the paperwork, move on." Velthari nodded slowly. The humans were the newest species to join the galactic community. They had appeared just 5 years, ago with ships that looked rough and simple compared to the smooth designs most civilizations preferred. Their technology worked, but it was built like they expected it to break and need fixing. Everything about them seemed rushed and temporary. "What do we know about their military?" Velthari asked, scrolling through the basic files. "Typical young species behavior," Gencol replied. "Lots of aggression, not much strategy. They divide themselves into smaller groups they call nations and fight each other constantly on their home planet. The Council thinks they will burn themselves out fighting the Morvek within a few months. The Morvek Empire was known throughout the galaxy as a problem that nobody wanted to deal with. They had conquered 15 species in the last century through pure brute force. They were strong, brutal, and very good at making other species surrender quickly. Most galactic powers had written off any territory the Morvek wanted as already lost." "Why did the humans pick a fight with them?" Velthari asked. "They did not pick it," Gencol said. "The Morvek attacked a human colony world. The humans declared war 3 days later. No negotiations, no attempts at diplomacy, just straight to war." Velthari made notes on the datapad. It sounded exactly like what you would expect from a young, aggressive species. See a threat, attack it. No thought about consequences or alternatives. The report would write itself. "When do I leave?" "Transport leaves tomorrow. You will be embedded with their fleet. Try not to get killed. The insurance paperwork is annoying." Velthari went home to pack. The small apartment overlooked the capital city of Alteria Prime, where millions of beings from dozens of species lived and worked together in peace. The sight usually made Velthari proud of how civilized the galaxy could be when species put aside their primitive instincts. Tonight, it just made the job ahead seem more depressing. Another species would learn the hard way that war only brought suffering. The humans would lose badly to the Morvek, and Velthari would document every painful moment of their defeat. The transport ship was efficient and clean, like everything else in Alterian space. Velthari spent the 3-day journey reading more files about humans. They were fascinating in their contradictions. They created beautiful art and terrible weapons with equal skill. They formed strong bonds with their families but fought brutal wars against strangers. Their home planet was covered with different cultures that somehow worked together despite constant disagreements. "Primitive but interesting," Velthari wrote in the preliminary notes. "Classic signs of a species that has not yet learned to control its aggressive impulses." The human fleet staging area was in a system near the border with Morvek space. As the transport approached, Velthari expected to see the usual chaos of a young species preparing for war. Ships flying in random patterns, commanders shouting orders, weapons being loaded without proper safety protocols. Instead, the human fleet moved like a precise dance. Ships took position in careful formations. Supply vessels moved between larger ships in planned routes. Everything looked organized and purposeful. "Unexpected," Velthari muttered, making more notes. The transport docked with a human ship called the UES Determination. The airlock opened, and Velthari got the first real look at humans up close. They were smaller than most species, with only 2 arms and no natural armor or weapons. They looked fragile, like they would break easily in a real fight. Captain Do-hyun met Velthari at the airlock. He was a middle-aged human with gray hair and calm eyes. He wore a simple uniform with few decorations. When he spoke, his voice was quiet and controlled. "Welcome aboard, Velthari. I am Captain Do-hyun. I hope your journey was comfortable." "Thank you, Captain. I am here to observe and record your military operations for the Galactic Council." "Of course. Dr. Minji will be your guide and translator. She knows more about different species than I do. Please let us know if you need anything. Dr. Minji was a young human woman with bright eyes and an eager expression. She spoke several galactic languages perfectly and seemed genuinely excited to meet Velthari. I have studied Alterian culture for years, she said, as she led Velthari through the ship. Your people's approach to conflict resolution is famous throughout the galaxy. I hope to learn much from having you here. The comment confused Velthari. Most species saw Alterians as weak because they preferred talking to fighting. Humans were supposed to be aggressive and primitive. Why would this one want to learn about peaceful solutions? The ship itself was another surprise. It was clean and well organized, but everything looked like it could be repaired quickly. Walls had panels that could be removed easily. Equipment was built to be fixed rather than replaced. Even the decoration was simple and practical. Your ship is very different from what I expected, Velthari said. How so? Most species build ships to look impressive. Yours looks like it is built to work. Dr. Minji smiled. Humans have a saying, form follows function. We care more about whether something works than whether it looks good. Though we try to make things look good too when we can. They reached Velthari's quarters, which were small but comfortable. Everything needed was there, but nothing extra. It felt honest in a way that Velthari had not expected. Tomorrow you can observe our command briefing, Dr. Minji said. Admiral Taewon will explain our strategy against the Morvek forces. I think you will find it interesting. That night, Velthari reviewed notes and tried to make sense of what had been observed so far. The humans were organized and professional, which was unexpected. They were also polite and thoughtful, which was even more unexpected. But they were still about to fight a war against an enemy that had defeated much stronger species. Perhaps they simply do not understand what they are facing, Velthari wrote. Their politeness may be ignorance rather than wisdom. The next morning, Velthari attended the command briefing. The main conference room was filled with human officers of different ages and backgrounds. Admiral Taewon stood at the front, pointing to a large display showing the local star systems. The Morvek fleet is here, he said, indicating a system 2 days away. Intelligence reports show 43 ships, including 6 heavy battle cruisers. They are following standard Morvek doctrine, mass formation, direct assault, overwhelming firepower. A young officer named Hejin raised her hand. Admiral, our fleet only has 28 ships. Are we planning to request reinforcements? No, Admiral Taewon replied. We are not going to fight them the way they expect to be fought. The room was quiet as the Admiral continued. The Morvek are excellent at one kind of warfare. They are very strong and very tough, but they only know how to do one thing. We are going to do something different. Velthari leaned forward, interested despite expectations. What could humans possibly do differently that stronger species had not already tried? Lieutenant Jiwoo, please explain the tactical plan. A calm-voiced officer stood up and began describing a battle plan unlike anything Velthari had ever heard. The humans were not planning to meet the Morvek in direct combat. Instead, they planned to use speed, coordination, and something they called psychological warfare. We will make them fight the way we want to fight, Lieutenant Jiwoo explained. Not the way they want to fight. As Velthari listened, a strange feeling began to grow. These humans were not talking like a young, primitive species. They were talking like they understood something about war that other species had missed. The meeting ended with detailed assignments for each ship and crew. Everyone knew exactly what they were supposed to do. There was no confusion, no arguments, no last-minute changes. When do we begin? Velthari asked Dr. Minji as they left the briefing room. We are already beginning, she replied. The war started the moment we decided how to fight it. Velthari spent the rest of the day observing human crew members at work. They moved with purpose and efficiency. But there was something else. They seemed confident without being arrogant. They prepared for battle like they had done it many times before, even though most of them had never fought in space. That evening, Captain Do-hyun invited Velthari to dinner in his quarters. The meal was simple human food, but it was prepared with care. What do you think of our preparations? The captain asked. They are more organized than I expected, Velthari admitted. But the Morvek are very strong. They have defeated species with much larger fleets than yours. Captain Dohyun nodded thoughtfully. Size and strength are important in war, but they are not the only important things. What else matters? Understanding. If you understand your enemy better than they understand you, you have already won half the battle. The comment stayed with Velthari through the night. The war should have been over. Most of the Morvek 3rd Battle Group had agreed to work with humans on peaceful development projects. The fighting had stopped. The immediate threat to human colonies was gone. By every normal measure, the humans had achieved complete victory, but they were not finished. Sir, Communications Officer Hyejin reported, we are receiving transmissions from Morvek High Command. They are demanding the return of their ships and the punishment of rebels. What is their tone? Admiral Taewon asked. Angry, sir. They are threatening to send the entire 2nd Fleet to restore order. Velthari felt a familiar dread. This was how wars really ended, with escalation, revenge, and cycles of violence that lasted for generations. The humans had won a battle and changed some minds, but the Morvek Empire was vast. They could send more ships, more soldiers, more weapons than the humans could possibly handle. Admiral, Captain Dohyun said, intelligence estimates the 2nd Fleet at over 200 ships. Even with our new Morvek allies, we would be badly outnumbered. Yes, Admiral Taewon agreed. So we need to make sure they never leave port. A preemptive strike on their base? Lieutenant Jiwoo asked. No. Something better. Admiral Taewon activated the main display, showing star charts of Morvek space. Dr. Kyungmin, are your diplomatic teams ready? A middle-aged human woman appeared on screen from another ship. Ready, Admiral? We have prepared presentation materials in 17 Morvek dialects. What kind of presentation materials? Velthari asked. Dr. Kyungmin smiled. History lessons, art exhibitions, cultural documentaries, everything we learned about pre-Empire Morvek civilization. Velthari did not understand. You are going to attack them with art? We are going to remind them who they used to be, Dr. Kyungmin explained. The same way we reminded the 3rd Battle Group. Cultural advisor Nari joined the conversation from her research station. We have been studying Morvek society for months. The Empire's control depends on keeping their people focused only on military expansion. But underneath that focus, the old culture still exists. People still remember the stories, still sing the songs, still carry the values their ancestors had before conquest became their only purpose. How can you possibly know that? Velthari demanded. You have never been to their worlds. We have been talking to former slaves, Nari explained. Many of them lived on Morvek worlds for years. They saw how ordinary Morvek citizens live when they think no one is watching. The Empire has not erased the old culture. It has just hidden it. Admiral Taewon outlined the plan. Instead of waiting for the 2nd Fleet to attack, human ships would travel to Morvek space and begin broadcasting on civilian communication networks. They would share historical records, cultural artifacts, and personal stories from reformed Morvek soldiers who had joined the Human Alliance. You are going into enemy territory to give them art lessons? Velthari asked incredulously. We are going into enemy territory to give them back their own identity, Admiral Taewon corrected. The plan was insane. It was also, Velthari was beginning to realize, typically human. The journey to Morvek space took 5 days. During that time, Velthari observed human crews working with their new Morvek allies to prepare broadcast materials. The collaboration was unlike anything Velthari had ever seen. Former enemies worked side by side, sharing knowledge and perspectives. Morvek soldiers who had spent their entire lives following orders were now helping to plan operations. Humans, who had been shooting at Morvek ships a week ago, were now learning Morvek languages and customs. How do you trust them? Velthari asked Commander Seojin, who was working with a group of Morvek Marines on security protocols. The same way they trust us, Seojin replied. By choosing to. But they were your enemies. They were following orders from people who were our enemies. That is different. A young Morvek officer named Jihoon overheard the conversation. He had been one of the first to join the Human Alliance, and his ship was now serving as a communications relay for the joint fleet. Before I met humans, Jihoon said, I thought strength meant never showing weakness. I thought trust meant controlling others so they could not betray you. Humans showed me that real strength comes from making others stronger. And real trust comes from believing others want to do the right thing. What if you are wrong? Velthari asked. What if some of your people choose to stay loyal to the Empire? Then we will respect that choice, Jihoon replied. But we will also make sure they understand what they are choosing between. When the joint fleet reached the edge of Morvek space, they immediately began receiving warnings and threats from military stations. The Second Fleet was mobilizing. Defense platforms were powering up weapons. The entire Morvek military was preparing for war. But the humans did not attack the military targets. Instead, they began broadcasting to civilian populations on Morvek worlds. The broadcasts were not propaganda or threats. They were documentaries about Morvek history, featuring artifacts and records that most Morvek civilians had never seen. They showed beautiful cities that had existed before the Empire. They played music that had been composed centuries ago. They shared stories about Morvek explorers and scientists and artists who had made amazing discoveries. Citizens of the Morvek worlds, Dr. Kyungmin's voice said in perfect Morvek, we are humans and we have come to share something wonderful with you. We have found pieces of your history that we think you might want to see. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Civilian communication networks exploded with activity as millions of Morvek citizens began discussing the broadcasts. Many had never heard the stories before. Others remembered hearing similar tales from grandparents who had lived before the Empire's current form. This is our music? Asked one voice from a Morvek city. We created this beauty? My great-grandmother used to sing something like this, said another. I thought she was making it up. These cities actually existed? We built them ourselves? The military tried to jam the broadcasts, but the humans had prepared for that. They had spread their transmitters across dozens of ships and hidden relay stations. When one signal was blocked, others continued. When military forces moved to stop them, the ships simply moved to different positions and kept broadcasting. More importantly, the broadcasts had sparked something that could not be jammed or blocked. Morvek civilians were talking to each other about their own history and culture. They were sharing stories and songs that had been passed down through families. They were asking questions about why their society had changed so much. Second Fleet is still mobilizing, Lieutenant Jiwoo reported, but they are receiving thousands of messages from civilian populations asking them to stop and listen to the broadcasts. Morvek High Command is ordering them to ignore civilian communications, Hyejin added. But fleet personnel are reporting communication difficulties. Velthari watched the tactical displays with growing amazement. The Morvek military was not being defeated by superior firepower or clever tactics. It was being paralyzed by its own people asking questions. How did you know this would work? Velthari asked Admiral Taewon. We did not know, the Admiral admitted. But we understood something important about the Morvek Empire. It depends on its people believing that conquest is the only way to survive and prosper. If people start believing there are other options, the Empire loses its foundation. But what if they choose conquest anyway? What if they decide they like being an empire? Then we will fight them, Admiral Taewon said simply. But we will have given them the chance to choose something better. That is what civilized people do. They give others the opportunity to be civilized too. The broadcast continued for 3 days. During that time, something unprecedented happened. Morvek civilians began organizing demonstrations on their own worlds. Not protests against the Empire, but celebrations of their rediscovered culture. People gathered in public spaces to share old songs and stories. Artists began creating new works inspired by historical traditions. Scientists started asking why they were only studying weapons instead of exploring the stars like their ancestors had done. The Morvek military found itself in an impossible position. They could not attack their own civilians for celebrating their own culture. But allowing the celebrations to continue meant accepting that there were alternatives to the Empire's current path. Second Fleet is reporting internal disputes, Intelligence Officer Sun Wu announced. Ship commanders are receiving conflicting orders from High Command and requests from their home worlds to support cultural preservation efforts. Several ships have already broken formation, Lieutenant Ji Wu added. They are returning to their bases without authorization. This is not warfare, Velthari said, but this time the words were filled with awe rather than confusion. No, Dr. Minji agreed. This is transformation. On the fourth day, the impossible happened. Morvek High Command requested a meeting with human representatives, not to discuss surrender terms or territorial boundaries, but to talk about what one of their messages called alternative development models. The meeting took place on a neutral space station. Velthari was again allowed to observe as Admiral Taewon and Dr. Kyungmin sat across from high-ranking Morvek officials who looked nothing like the aggressive commanders Velthari had expected. The human fleet moved through space like a school of fish, each ship knowing exactly where to go without needing constant orders. Velthari watched from the bridge of the Determination as 28 human vessels took positions around a small moon where they would meet the Morvek force. Contact in 6 hours, reported Communications Officer Hyejin. She was young, maybe 25 human years, but she spoke with the calm voice of someone much older. Morvek fleet maintaining standard battle formation. Captain Do-hyun nodded. Any response to our broadcasts? They are ignoring all communication attempts, sir. Standard Morvek doctrine. Velthari had been observing human preparations for 2 days now. Everything they did seemed careful and planned, but Velthari still could not understand how they hoped to win. The Morvek ships were larger, stronger, and more heavily armed. Simple mathematics said the humans should lose badly. Captain, Velthari said, may I ask why you are broadcasting to them if they will not respond? Captain Do-hyun smiled slightly. Sometimes the message is not for the person you are sending it to. Before Velthari could ask what that meant, Lieutenant Ji Woo called out from the tactical station. Sir, we are receiving responses to the broadcasts. From the Morvek? No, sir. From Morvek slaves on their ships. We are getting at least 40 separate signals. Velthari's skin changed color with surprise. The Morvek Empire used conquered species as workers and soldiers on their ships. Most people forgot that those slaves were still there, still capable of hearing and thinking. What are they saying? Captain Do-hyun asked. Lieutenant Ji Woo listened to something through an earpiece. They want to know if we really meant what we said in the broadcast. What did you say in the broadcast? Velthari asked. Dr. Minji, who had been standing quietly nearby, answered. We told them that any Morvek ship that surrenders will be treated well. Any slave who helps us will be given freedom and safe passage home. Any Morvek soldier who lays down weapons will be fed and protected according to galactic law. You offered to help slaves during a battle? We offered to help everyone, Dr. Minji corrected, including the Morvek themselves. This made no sense to Velthari. You did not help your enemies during a war. You defeated them. The whole point of fighting was to win, not to worry about what happened to the other side. Sir, Hyejin called out, Morvek fleet is changing formation. They are spreading out more than usual. Captain Do-hyun studied the tactical display. They are worried about the slave signals. They think their own people might turn against them. Will they? Velthari asked. Some will, Lieutenant Ji Woo said calmly. Not because we asked them to, because we gave them hope that things could be different. The Morvek fleet appeared on the main screen an hour later. 43 ships in a loose formation, moving toward the human position with obvious confidence. The largest ships were twice the size of anything in the human fleet. Their weapons could probably destroy a human ship with a single shot. All ships, this is Admiral Taewon, came a voice over the communication system. Execute Plan Delta 7. Remember, we are not here to destroy. We are here to win. Velthari watched as the human fleet suddenly split into 5 smaller groups. Each group moved in a different direction, forcing the Morvek formation to spread out even more to follow them. Within minutes, the organized Morvek fleet had become scattered groups of ships chasing different human forces. "Why did you split up?" Velthari asked. "Now they can defeat you piece by piece." "Can they?" Captain Dohyun asked. "Look at their formation now. Look at how they are moving." Velthari studied the display. The Morvek ships were no longer in their careful formation. They were spread across a wide area, with large gaps between groups. Ships that should have been supporting each other were too far apart to help. "You made them disorganize themselves," Velthari realized. "We gave them a choice," Dr. Minji said. "Follow our ships and break their formation, or stay together and let us escape." They chose to follow because that is what Morvek always do. They always choose to attack. The first engagement began when a group of 3 human ships encountered 5 Morvek vessels near the moon's far side. Velthari expected to see the humans destroyed quickly. Instead, the human ships moved in ways that seemed impossible. They did not try to match the Morvek ships in firepower. Instead, they moved fast and unpredictably, staying close to the moon's surface where the larger Morvek ships had trouble following. When they fired their weapons, they aimed for specific systems rather than trying to destroy the enemy ships completely. "Target their weapons and engines," Lieutenant Jiwoo called out as the determination joined the fight. "Disable. Do not destroy." "Why not destroy them?" Velthari asked. "Because we might need those ships later," Captain Dohyun replied. The battle lasted 3 hours. When it was over, 15 Morvek ships had been disabled but not destroyed. 8 Morvek ships had surrendered after their slave crews took control. 5 Morvek ships had been destroyed, but only after they refused to surrender and continued fighting even when their weapons were gone. The human fleet had lost 2 ships and suffered damage to 6 others. By any normal measure, it should have been a disaster. The humans were outnumbered and outgunned. But somehow, they had won. "How?" Velthari asked as damage reports came in. Commander Seojun, who led the human marines, was coordinating the boarding of surrendered Morvek ships. He paused to answer Velthari's question. "We did not fight their strength," he said. "We fought their weaknesses." "What weaknesses?" "They are the strongest military force in this part of the galaxy. Strong, yes, but not smart. They only know one way to fight. They always attack directly. They always use maximum force. They never adapt or change tactics. Once you understand that, they become predictable." Velthari watched human crews boarding the disabled Morvek ships. They were not looting or destroying. Instead, they were providing medical aid to wounded Morvek soldiers and helping freed slaves contact their homeworlds. Medical Officer So-young was working in the ship's medical bay, treating both human and Morvek wounded. She moved between patients without regard for which species they belonged to, providing the same careful treatment to everyone. "Why do you help them?" Velthari asked her. "They were trying to kill you an hour ago." So-young looked up from bandaging a Morvek soldier's arm. "Because they are hurt. When someone is hurt, you help them. That is what medical officers do. But they are your enemies." "No," So-young said gently. "They were following orders from people who are our enemies. That is different." The distinction confused Velthari. In every war the Alterian had observed, enemies were enemies. You fought them until one side won and the other side lost. You did not worry about individuals or motivations, or whether someone was just following orders. That evening, Captain Dohyun held a meeting with his senior officers to plan the next engagement. Velthari was invited to observe. "Intelligence reports show the main Morvek fleet is regrouping here," Lieutenant Jiwoo said, pointing to a star system 1 day away. 31 ships remaining. They are requesting reinforcements from their nearest base. "How long until reinforcements arrive?" Admiral Taewon asked over the communication link. 4 days, sir." "Good. That gives us time to finish this properly." "What do you mean by properly?" Velthari asked. Admiral Taewon's image smiled on the screen. "We mean ending this war in a way that prevents the next one." After the meeting, Velthari walked through the ship's corridors. Human crew members were working to repair battle damage, but they were also doing something else. They were talking to former Morvek slaves who had chosen to stay with the human fleet, rather than return immediately to their homeworlds. One of these conversations caught Velthari's attention. A human engineer named Sunwoo was speaking with a young Zephyrian who had been enslaved by the Morvek for 5 years. The Morvek told us that all other species were weak, the Zephyrian was saying. They said strength was the only thing that mattered in the galaxy. What do you think now? Sunwoo asked. I think the Morvek do not understand what strength means. You defeated them, but you did not become like them. You stayed who you are. Sunwoo nodded thoughtfully. Becoming like your enemy to defeat them is not victory, it is surrender. The comment stuck in Velthari's mind as the ship prepared for its next engagement. The humans had won their first battle against the Morvek, but they had done it in a way that challenged everything Velthari thought they knew about war. They had been efficient without being cruel. They had been strong without being brutal. They had defeated their enemies while somehow making those enemies better off than they had been before. This is not how war works, Velthari muttered while making notes. Dr. Minji, who was passing by, overheard the comment. How does war work? One side wins, the other side loses. The winners take what they want, the losers suffer the consequences. Dr. Minji sat down next to Velthari. What if both sides could win? That is impossible. War is about competing for resources or territory or power. Only one side can have those things. What if war was about something else? Like what? Dr. Minji thought for a moment. What if war was about solving problems? What if the point was, not to defeat the other side, but to create a situation where the problem that caused the war no longer exists? Velthari stared at her. That is not war, that is diplomacy. 6 months after the war officially ended, Velthari stood in the observation deck of a space station orbiting New Cathara, the first joint human Morvek colony. Through the transparent walls, ships from both species worked together to build orbital platforms and landing facilities. Former enemies moved through the station's corridors as colleagues and friends. It should have been a happy ending. Instead, Velthari felt a growing sense of dread that had nothing to do with any immediate danger. The colony is progressing ahead of schedule, reported Yunwoo, a young human officer who had become Velthari's unofficial guide. We should have the first permanent settlements operational within 2 years. Velthari nodded, making notes that felt increasingly meaningless. The Galactic Council was expecting a standard war report, a document describing human military tactics, analyzing their victory over the Morvek, and providing recommendations for future conflicts involving this new species. How could Velthari possibly write such a report? How could anyone explain what had really happened here? Yunwoo, Velthari said. How many wars has your species fought? The young human thought for a moment. On our home world, thousands probably. We kept very detailed records, but the exact number depends on how you define a war. And how many ended like this one? Like this one? Most of them eventually. Most of them? Velthari stared at the human in disbelief. You have turned enemies into allies thousands of times? Yunwoo looked confused by the question. Well, yes. That is how problems get solved. You fight until everyone understands what the real problem is, then you work together to fix it. What else would you do? Before Velthari could answer, Dr. Minji joined them on the observation deck. She had been working with Morvek scientists to establish research protocols for the colony's development. How are your reports coming along? She asked Velthari. They are not, Velthari admitted. I do not know how to explain what I have seen. What is difficult to explain? Velthari gestured toward the construction work outside. All of this, the way you fight wars, the way you turn enemies into friends, the way you solve problems that every other species considers unsolvable. Dr. Minji sat down next to Velthari. What is unsolvable about the Morvek situation? They were aggressive conquerors. They had been expanding through military force for centuries. Every galactic power had written them off as a permanent threat that could only be contained, never eliminated. But we did not eliminate them, Dr. Minji pointed out. We helped them become something better. That is exactly what I cannot explain. How did you know it was possible? Dr. Minji was quiet for a moment. Do you know about human history, Velthari? Do you know what we were like before we reached the stars? I have read the basic files. Multiple nations, frequent conflicts, high levels of aggression. We were worse than the Morvek, Dr. Minji said simply. Much worse. We fought wars that lasted decades. We developed weapons that could destroy our entire planet. We committed acts of violence against each other that most galactic species would consider impossible to forgive. Then how did you change? We learned. We made mistakes, terrible mistakes, and we learned from them. We discovered that fighting wars to win them was pointless if winning meant destroying everything worth protecting. So we learned to fight wars to end them. Veteran soldier Yuna approached their table, overhearing the conversation. She was an older human, with the quiet manner of someone who had seen many battles. Dr. Minji is being modest, Yuna said. We did not learn these things easily. It took us centuries and cost us millions of lives. But eventually, we understood that the goal of war should never be to defeat your enemy. It should be to create a world where that enemy does not need to be your enemy anymore. How many wars have you personally fought in? Velthari asked Yuna. 7, she replied. 3 before we left our home system. 4 since we joined the galactic community. And they all ended like this one? They all ended with former enemies, becoming allies. That does not mean they were easy or that people did not suffer. But yes, they all ended with everyone being better off than they were before the fighting started. Velthari felt something like panic rising in their chest. You are telling me that humans have essentially solved warfare. We have learned how to use warfare to solve problems, Yuna corrected. That is different. How is it different? Because we still fight. We still use force when necessary. We still make hard choices and accept difficult consequences. But we fight for specific goals, and we stop fighting when those goals are achieved. Captain Dohyun joined the group, carrying a datapad with updates from the colony construction. Velthari, you look troubled. Is something wrong? Captain, what happens when the galactic community learns what humans can do? What do you mean? You have taken the most aggressive military empire in this region and transformed it into a peaceful development confederation in less than a year. What happens when other species realize that humans can do this to any military force? Captain Do-hyun considered the question carefully. I suppose they will have to decide whether they want to be allies or targets. The simple statement sent chills through Velthari. You would do this to other species? Turn their entire civilizations into something different? Only if they force us to, Captain Do-hyun replied. We prefer to make friends without fighting first. But if someone attacks us or threatens innocent people, yes, we will change them into the kind of people who do not attack others or threaten innocence. That is terrifying. Is it? Dr. Minji asked. Why is it terrifying to make violent people peaceful? Because... Velthari struggled to find words. Because it means nothing is safe. No government, no military, no way of life is safe from being changed by humans if you decide it needs to be changed. The humans exchanged glances. Finally, Yunwoo spoke up. Velthari, do you think the Morvek Empire should have been allowed to continue conquering other species? No, but do you think there are other governments or militaries in the galaxy that cause unnecessary suffering for their own people or others? Yes, but then what would you have us do? Ignore suffering when we have the ability to stop it? Velthari had no answer. The humans were right, of course. The galaxy was full of oppressive governments, aggressive militaries, and systems that caused enormous pain for billions of beings. But the idea that one species had the power to change all of that was overwhelming. We do not want to rule the galaxy, Yuna said gently. We do not want to force our way of life on others. But we cannot ignore it when people suffer because of systems that could be changed. How do you decide what needs to be changed? We ask the people who are suffering, Captain Do-hyun replied, and we listen to their answers. That evening, Velthari walked through the station's market area, where human and Morvek families shopped and ate together. Children from both species played games that neither could have imagined 6 months ago. Adults worked on projects that benefited everyone rather than just their own group. At a small cafe, Velthari encountered Jihoon, the young Morvek officer who had been one of the first to join the Human Alliance. He was sitting with his family, a partner and 2 children, who had just arrived from their home world. "Velthari," Jihoon called out, "please join us." As they sat together, Jihoon's partner asked about Velthari's work. "You are writing about the war?" "I am trying to," Velthari admitted. "But I do not know how to explain what really happened." "What is difficult to explain?" Jihoon asked. "Your people were conquerors for centuries. You built your entire culture around military expansion. Now you are peacefully building colonies and working with former enemies. That kind of change should be impossible." Jihoon's partner smiled. "We were never really conquerors, we were just scared. Scared. Scared that we were not strong enough to survive on our own. Scared that other species would destroy us if we did not destroy them first. Scared that there was not enough room in the galaxy for everyone. The humans showed us that we were wrong," Jihoon added. "There is plenty of room. There are plenty of resources. And we are much stronger when we work with others than when we fight them." One of Jihoon's children, a young girl, looked up from her drawing. "Papa, are the humans magic?" Jihoon laughed. "No, little one. They are just very good at understanding people. How did they understand us when we did not understand ourselves? Because they learned to understand themselves first." Velthari left the cafe with a heavy heart. The final piece of the puzzle had fallen into place, and the picture it revealed was more disturbing than anything Velthari had imagined. The humans had not simply developed better weapons or superior tactics. They had weaponized understanding itself. They had learned to see through the surface motivations and fears that drove conflict to the deeper needs and desires that could be addressed through cooperation. They had become a species that could look at any form of organized violence and find a way to transform it into organized compassion. Back in their quarters, Velthari sat before a blank report screen for hours. How could anyone explain this to the Galactic Council? How could anyone prepare other species for what humans represented? Finally, Velthari began to write, "I was sent to observe humans wage war against the Morvek Empire. The second battle was different from the first. The remaining Morvek fleet had learned from their defeat and changed their tactics. They stayed in tight formation and refused to chase scattered human ships. They had also stopped using slave crews for critical operations, keeping only Morvek soldiers in important positions. They adapted," Lieutenant Jiwoo observed as the human fleet approached the Morvek position. "Faster than expected." Velthari felt a moment of satisfaction. Finally, the Morvek were acting like proper military forces. They had learned from their mistakes and adjusted their strategy. Now the humans would face a real challenge. "What is your plan now?" Velthari asked Captain Do-yoon. "The same plan we have always had," the captain replied. "End this war." "But they changed their tactics." "Your previous strategy will not work." Captain Do-yoon smiled. "Good. We were hoping they would adapt. It makes the next part easier." Before Velthari could ask what that meant, Communications Officer Hyejin spoke up. "Sir, we are receiving a transmission from the Morvek fleet. They want to talk." "Put it through." The main screen showed a large Morvek commander with the scars and decorations of many battles. When he spoke, his voice was angry and confused. "Human fleet, I am war leader Thakmor of the Morvek 3rd Battle Group. You have used coward tactics and turned our own slaves against us. Fight us properly, or we will destroy every human world we can find." Admiral Taewon's image appeared on a smaller screen as he responded from his flagship. "War leader Thakmor, I am Admiral Taewon of the Human Defense Fleet. We are willing to fight you properly. But first we want to understand why you attacked our colony. We attack because we are strong and you are weak. That is the way of the galaxy. But why did you choose our colony specifically? There are many colonies belonging to many species. Why did you pick ours?" The question seemed to confuse the Morvek commander. Because it was there. Because we could take it." "So there was no specific reason? No threat to your people? No resource you needed?" No old conflict between our species. You attacked because you could. Yes. That is how the strong behave. Admiral Taiwan was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was thoughtful. War Leader Thakmor, what happens to your people when there are no more colonies to attack? What do you mean? Your empire grows by conquering others, but space is big, and there are only so many species to conquer. What happens when you have defeated everyone? The Morvek commander's expression changed. He looked like he had never considered the question before. We will be victorious. And then what? What does your people do after victory? The transmission ended abruptly. War Leader Thakmor had cut the connection. Why did you ask him that? Velthari wondered. Because, Admiral Taiwan said, he has never thought about it. None of them have. They know how to conquer, but they do not know why they conquer. The battle that followed was unlike anything Velthari had ever seen. The humans did not attack the Morvek fleet directly. Instead, they surrounded it and began broadcasting on every frequency the Morvek used for communication. But they were not broadcasting threats or demands for surrender. They were broadcasting questions. Morvek soldiers, came a calm human voice. What did your people do before they became conquerors? What did you build? What did you create? What made you proud besides your victories? The questions continued for hours while the two fleets faced each other without firing a shot. The humans asked about Morvek history, culture, art, and philosophy. They asked about Morvek families and homes and dreams. This is not warfare, Velthari protested to Dr. Minji. I do not know what this is. This is the most important part of warfare, Dr. Minji replied. Understanding who you are fighting and why. Slowly, responses began coming from individual Morvek ships. Not from commanders, but from ordinary soldiers who found themselves thinking about questions they had never been asked before. Before the Ice Empire, we were builders, came one transmission. My grandfather built bridges that connected islands on our home world. We had music, said another voice. Complex songs that told the stories of our ancestors. We studied the stars, said a third. We wanted to learn what was out there, not conquer it. As more Morvek soldiers began talking, their commanders tried to stop them. But the humans had done something clever. They had connected their questions to Morvek communication systems in a way that could not be easily blocked without shutting down all ship-to-ship coordination. War Leader Thakmor appeared, on screen again, his face twisted with rage. Stop this. You are confusing my soldiers with useless talk. We are reminding them of who they were before they became what you made them. Admiral Taiwan replied calmly. They are warriors. They exist to conquer. No, said a new voice from within the Morvek fleet. We exist to live. We became warriors because you told us we had to. The voice belonged to a young Morvek officer who had taken over communications on one of their ships. War Leader, when did we stop building bridges and start building only weapons? When did we stop studying stars and start destroying planets? Traitor, Thakmor roared. I will have you executed. For asking questions? For remembering our history? Other voices joined in from other Morvek ships. Soldiers who had been quiet for years began talking about what they remembered from before. The Empire became focused only on conquest. Velthari watched in amazement as the Morvek fleet began to argue with itself. Ship commanders shouted orders that subordinates questioned. Soldiers who had never thought about anything except following orders began thinking about why those orders existed. How did you know this would happen? Velthari asked. Intelligence. Officer Sunwoo, who had been quiet during the exchange, finally spoke. Because we studied them, not just their military tactics or ship designs. We studied their culture, their history, their psychology. You have spies in their territory? No. We studied their public records, their old broadcasts, their art and literature. Everything they left behind before they became an empire focused only on war. Sunwoo brought up a display showing Morvek historical data. 500 years ago, the Morvek were explorers and builders. They created beautiful cities and amazing works of art. They only became conquerors after a series of disasters destroyed most of their homeworld. So you are saying they became warriors because they were desperate? We are saying they became conquerors because they forgot they had other choices. The battle, if it could be called a battle, continued for 2 days. The humans never fired a single shot. Instead, they kept asking questions and sharing historical information about Morvek culture from before the Empire. Slowly, the Morvek fleet began to change. Ships that had been in perfect formation started moving independently. Crews began refusing orders that did not make sense to them. Some ships asked for permission to leave and return home. War leader Thakmor tried to maintain control, but his authority was crumbling. When soldiers stop believing that their cause is right, it becomes very hard to make them fight. On the 3rd day, a group of Morvek ships approached the human fleet under a flag of truce. Their commander was not Thakmor, but the young officer, who had first questioned the war leader's orders. "I am Ship Commander Kethral," he said. "I speak for those who remember what we used to be. We want to talk about ending this war." Admiral Taiwan met with the Morvek representatives on a neutral station. Velthari was allowed to observe the negotiations. "What are your terms for surrender?" Kethral asked. "We do not want your surrender," Admiral Taiwan replied. "We want your partnership." "I do not understand. The Morvek Empire attacks other species because you believe you need to expand to survive. But expansion through conquest is not sustainable. Eventually you run out of people to conquer, or you meet someone stronger than you." Admiral Taiwan activated a holographic display showing star charts. "There are thousands of uninhabited worlds in this region. Worlds with resources, good climates, and room for new cities. Instead of taking worlds from other species, why not build new ones?" "We do not know how to build anymore," Kethral said sadly. "We only know how to take." "Then we will teach you. Our engineers will work with your people to design new colonies. Our diplomats will help you establish trade relationships instead of tributary relationships. Our historians will help you reconnect with your own culture." Strategic planner Mina, who had been quiet during the negotiations, finally spoke. "The human government has already authorized the construction of 3 joint human Morvek colonies. We can begin planning immediately if you are interested." Velthari stared at the humans in disbelief. They had been planning for peace before the war even started. Every battle, every strategy, every decision had been designed not to defeat the Morvek, but to create the conditions for this exact conversation. "You planned this entire war," Velthari accused Admiral Taiwan during a break in the negotiations. "We planned to end it," the Admiral corrected. "There is a difference. How could you know it would work?" "We could not know, but we could prepare for the possibility. War is not just about destroying your enemy's ability to fight. It is about creating your enemy's ability to choose something better than fighting."